and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Fence, brought to you in association, of course, with Boylesports, and that's what we're back for today, a special, because of course it is the Boylesports Irish Grand National on Easter Monday, and that is going to be the focus of this show, which is of course your go-to weekly jumps programme, and we've got a few more special editions coming your way before the jump season finishes for the season. So without further ado, we can kick straight on, but don't forget, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. That way you won't miss a single episode of Off the Fence. Let's introduce the boys. I am joined, as always, by Barry Geraghty and Tony Keenan. It's been a couple of weeks, Tony. How have you been? Have you missed us? Have you missed the shows on a Monday?
Oh yes, of course. The answer to your initial question, how have I been? Wet, I would say, would be the answer to that. I think it's the wettest March on record, Met Éireann were saying in the last few days, and that's obviously going to feed into Fairyhouse. The ground is looking like it's going to be soft, maybe heavy, which hasn't been the case, I think, in the last few Easter meetings there.
Okay, well, we will be focusing in on all things ground and form related on this show ahead of Fairyhouse, so bear that wet March in mind. Barry Geraghty, how are you?
I'm good, Vanessa. Yeah, all fresh after a few weeks since Aintree, or since Cheltenham, should I say. Had the pleasure of walking around Aintree on Tuesday of this week, so that was nice.
Good. Well, we will be focusing in on the National next week, but for now, of course, it is the Boylesports Irish Grand National. It is going to be our main focus. And Barry, you won this race back in, was it 2014, was Shut the Front Door? What was that day like for you? Reminisce for a minute.
That was a big day, Vanessa. I live about 6 mile from Fairyhouse and grew up about 10 mile from the track, so it was one that I always wanted to win, but probably had given up all hope at that stage. And then when it did happen, it was surreal, and yeah, it was celebrated for a week, I'd say.
Was it a pure relief given how long you'd waited to win it when you crossed the line, or what was the actual feeling like? Just relief that you got that one ticked off the list?
It was funny. I promise you, like I'd probably ridden it about 16 or 17 times at that stage every year since I was about 18, and I'd ridden probably about 6 favourites, and I'd say 5th or 6th was as good as I got. I'd given up. I just thought this one won't happen, and I just had, put it to bed and said that's how it'll be. And anyway, eventually it did happen. Shut the front door, and it was only out of AP being suspended that I got the spare ride, and I never went close in any year since.
Well, at least you got your name on the list. That's the big one done. Let's crack on with this year's renewal, guys, and it might not be the deepest renewal of the Boylesports Irish Grand National, but you can make cases for so many in here. You've got the Thedevilscoachman up at the top of the betting at 6-1, being the market leader for this for a little while for the Noel Meade team. Lord Lariat obviously won the race last year off a fair bit lower mark for the Dermot McLaughlin team at 8-1. Stumptown in there at 9s, Angel Dawn at 12, Chemical Energy 12s. There's just so many different angles in here. Barry, I think let's start with you, and we'll go through the top few in the betting with a fine-tooth comb. So let's start with the market leader in the Thedevilscoachman. Is he a worthy favourite, and is he the sort of horse to win an Irish National?
Well, he has the ideal profile. Novices do well in the race. It's arguably he's unexposed. He's a very, very strong record on soft and slower ground, so conditions are ideal for him. I suppose that the one slight negative I would have might be just his jumping. How will he be in a competitive race like this? If you watch a rerun of him winning in Limerick last time, he put in a good round of jumping, but he was slow at the second last when left to pop. Jumped the last really well, but you could argue that he jumped it really well and very clean. So that's the only concern I would have him. I think he has the ideal profile for the race and the ground, but just whether his jumping is just going to be quick enough and sharp enough for the race. That'll be the concern for me with him. Stumptown ran a great race in Cheltenham, and the concern for me there would be he's a 6-year-old on a quick turnaround. Like Cheltenham on this for this race, any horse that ran in Cheltenham, they're between 24 and 27 days since they ran. So who can have bounced back? And you often see the marked Cheltenham leaves on horses, especially in a staying race. And you could imagine all horses that are lined up here would have ran in staying races at the festival. So that would be a slight negative. But there's plenty with chances. I thought Chemical Energy could be a horse who could overcome that, given the fact that he had an easy enough season prior to that. He disappointed on his previous run, but he beat Mallow Mission back in October in Cheltenham, so he has some good form. He's a good second to Geraghty and Tony in the National Hunt Chase. I thought he was one with a chance. But Panda Boy was the one that was catching my eye really. Ran a good race in the Paddy Power Christmas in Leopardstown. He fell last time, but he looked like a proper stayer in the Leopardstown race. He seemed to be caught for a bit of pace turning in, but finished strongly. Like that, he's limited experience. He's only 4 completed starts over fences. But as I say, he looks like a strong stayer.
Fascinating, yeah. I mean, the one horse that we haven't mentioned there, Tony, is of course last year's winner in Lord Lariat, who sits second favourite at the moment at 8-1 for the Dermot McLaughlin yard, as I've already mentioned. Obviously off the higher mark now. What do you think of his profile coming into it for this second renewal? And you know, does that higher mark, can he do it off that higher mark now?
Yes, he'd have a chance. I'd say it doesn't look as strong as a race as last season's was. I think the proximity of Aintree has certainly affected that. I think all the horses who look like they're going to get in at Aintree were taken out of Fairyhouse today, and just looking at the ratings of those at the top of the weights, you've got a 160 horse there in Royal Pagaille, and then you're dropping away all the way down to 151 in Espinito Bello, and everything below that is rated in the 140s or lower. So there were, over recent years, there would tend to be more 150 plus rated horses in it. So that possibly helped Lord Lariat that it's a lower quality race maybe, or at least a little bit lower maybe than last year's running of it. I would agree with an awful lot of what Barry says, particularly on the Devil's Coachman. Like, he was a horse that, he's a novice, but he's a second season novice. He started out last season over 2 miles. I think he was running behind Fernie Hollow and St. Salmondy's when he initially went chasing. I would be concerned about his jumping. I think it has been an issue. Those beginners chases and kind of graded novice races do tend to attract small fields, 5 and 6 and 7 runners and such, like the race that he's ran in Limerick and Naas there recently. So this is going to be a very, very different race with obviously the pushing for 30 runners on Easter Monday. Stumptown, to me, he might struggle a bit to get in actually. He's 6th on the ballot at the moment. A lot of horses did come out today, Wednesday. But you would think that horses that are left in at the 5 days now at this stage are very much intended runners, unless they meet some sort of a setback. So he does need the 5 or 6 horses to come out there to give him a chance of getting in. So that could be tight enough for him. Yeah, like Barry, I would be keen on the chances of Panda Boy. I just think he's a very strong stayer. When he won the Pertemps qualifier at Leopardstown Christmas before last, it looked like it was stamina that won it for him. He was travelling worse than the runner-up, definitely coming to the last, but found plenty. Excellent run the Paddy Power Christmas, as mentioned by Barry, and I would say myself that dropping him down in trip at Leopardstown back in early March down to 2.5 miles, although he felt to me that would have been just a prep run for this race. This race looks like it's made for him, though he would want the ground to dry out a little bit. And this race just vastly more valuable than that Leopardstown race in March. So Martin Brazel, obviously good at keeping horses and getting them right for these big races. Didn't have much luck, I would say, more so than anything else in Cheltenham with an epic song and fast or slow bookman down, kind of a narrow finishes. Could probably do a little bit of a swing there, but this horse will go there with a big chance. Some of the others there, I Am Maximus, bought by JP McManus after the run in the Brown Advisory. Wouldn't be totally sold on his claims. He ran here in a beginner's chase back at the Hatton's Grace meeting and looked to have a bit of an issue with going right-handed. He was persistently out to his left. I thought that was a little bit of a strange buy out of McManus' team. A little bit flattered by his run at Cheltenham there, kind of picking up the pieces. One there maybe at a bigger price would be Daffy Bleu. Jigginstown, kind of older horse, wouldn't be the usual type for this, but if it is going to be quite testing ground, he's been in better form than this season. He has been in a few of the recent years, ran well in the Cork National. He's had 3 goes this season beyond kind of 3 miles down the Kimmuir Cork National and the Grand National Trail of Punchestown. He kind of ran into the frame in them all. So at a bigger price, he might be able to get in the mix. But Panda Boy would definitely be my lean at the moment.
Okay, 2 votes for Panda Boy, and I can tell you viewers and listeners out there that was not planned beforehand. The boys looked at this race very much independently and both landed on Panda Boy for all the reasons already outlined in the Boylesports Irish Grand National, and of course the sponsors Boylesports are now non-runner, no bet in the Irish Grand National. So you can work away with that, let's move on and we'll cover a little bit of the rest of the Fairyhouse card over Easter weekend, focusing in, of course, on the Grade 1s. And Barry will go back a day and onto the Mares Novices Hurdle, which is, of course, now the Honeysuckle Mares Novices Hurdle, a Grade 1 event over the 2 miles, 4.5 furlongs. And Ashroe Diamond is the 13-8 favourite with Boylesports currently. Obviously, Miss Cheltenham comes here as the class act in here, but she's got to take on the likes of Magical Zoe, Halka de Taba, both in there as second and third favourites. And then Night and Day, the complete unknown. Princess Zoe has been in the press for all the wrong reasons of late. It's a fascinating contest, this, and plenty deep enough for this sort of race.
It is. It looks very competitive. Ashroe Diamond obviously form ties in with Halka de Tarbert. That ties in obviously with Cheltenham form Magical Zoe. So there wouldn't look like there's an awful lot between them. And probably the one that caught my eye, given the conditions and the slower going you're going to have in Fairyhouse than you had in Cheltenham, was Princess Zoe. I thought she's a winner of the Prix de Cadran in Cheltenham, or in Cheltenham and Longchamp, shall I say, over 2.5 on heavy ground 2.5 years ago. She is a good mare off the flat. She jumped okay, we'll say, on her first start when she won. She jumped average, I would have said, in Cheltenham. There is room for improvement, but I think the step up and trip is going to help her there, and the ground likewise. So I think she's one who could run well at a reasonable price, but it looks a competitive race. Magical Zoe was the unlucky one in Cheltenham, coming from way off the pace. She will enjoy the step up and trip, so maybe one of the Zoes could be the ones to be on.
Okay, well, you've gone with Princess Zoe then, Barry. But Tony, over to you. Of course, you were very keen on Magical Zoe before Cheltenham, and she ran such a good race for you and your followers. Are you going in again with her here to take on the likes of Ashroe Diamond and like the unknown in Night and Day and a couple of those types of horses?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Paddy Keogh must be very sure of this horse winning, this Princess Zoe. He's gone and sponsored one of the races earlier on the card, I think, on Sunday. He must be taking all his pals. He's very sure this mare's going to do the job for him on Sunday. And she does have a chance there, as Barry mentioned. The step up and trip will suit, the slower ground will suit. This could be quite a stamina test, as you mentioned, Vanessa. It's over further than the Bear, 2 miles. So, you know, the potential of this turning into a slog is there. I thought Ashroe Diamond was quite a skinny price in this, though I must say I wouldn't advise anyone having a bet kind of anti-post at current prices. The percentage in this race are very, very high at the moment. You're definitely going to see better prices post declarations on this. But Ashroe Diamond does look like she's going to be favourite. I would be unconvinced that the step up to 2.5 will really suit her. She looks to have a bit of speed to my eye. You mentioned Magical Zoe earlier. Yeah, I think there's a fair chance that she might have been the best horse in the Dawn Run, but again, she doesn't look particularly slow either. She had a good burst of speed. They get involved kind of from off the pace to winning down Ryle, and then look quite fast and winning up Bumper as well. So really testing ground may not be hurting either. Like, she was off all throughout the winter. Connection said it was because of her age, most of that, which is fair enough, but wouldn't be back in my mind be that maybe heavy ground isn't her thing. I think Halka de Tarbert is one that should definitely be suited by going up and trip, should definitely be suited by slower ground. I just have a concern about her going right-handed. It just was shifting that way at one or two of them in Cheltenham. I think particularly it was second last of the last she went that way. It just didn't look totally at home at the track at Fairyhouse when she ran here back in January. So I haven't really come down on anything. If the ground was to dry out a little bit, I'd probably lean towards Magical Zoe, but I do think I will be against the favourite at the prices if she's any in around that kind of sub 2-1 mark, which looks like she may well be.
Okay, but we shall wait for the market to settle a little bit before sort of really getting stuck into that race. Let's move on to the Fairyhouse Gold Cup, which could be, again, just a really interesting race, this, over the 2 miles, 4 furlongs. And I suppose the headline act will be El Fabiolo, the Arkle winner. It's his entry. This is where his sole entry is in this race. We don't know if he's going to show up, but other horses that have entries, obviously from the same yard as Sir Gerhard. Allegor de Vassi is also in there, Mighty Potter. Banbridge, obviously missed Cheltenham and is looking for better ground. He's not going to get that at Fairyhouse. Might he go to Aintree instead? Appreciate it also in there. I mean, even if half of these ones show up, then that would be a pretty decent race, wouldn't it, Tony?
Yeah, 15 in it at the moment, and you could see a lot of them maybe pitching up. New sponsors, I think, for this race here, the Willow Warm Gold Cup. I was drawn in by that name, and I said I'd have a look at carbon neutral briquettes. Is what they make apparently. Maybe not so much need for them. They're coming into the spring and summer, but fair play to kind of quite unusual sponsorship there. Yeah, I'm expecting quite a big field for this. The one, I suppose, that has kind of been prepped for it, kind of kept back a little bit for this race is Journey With Me. I'd say he's an absolutely certain runner. Don't particularly like him, to be honest, though. I didn't know about his win in Naas. Yeah, he was very strong in the market, but I'd say things went right. Noel Meade's horse flanking manoeuvre made a fairly bad mistake going well. 3 out. Journey With Me's head carriage wouldn't be wonderful. The horse he beat in seconds, a little bit of a tail flasher. Gavin Cromwell's Jippy McManus horse, so it kind of be against him. El Fabiolo, like if he turned up, obviously would be the one to beat. I just don't think that they would be inclined to run him here. I think he will definitely get this trip, probably improve for this trip in time, but whether they want to do it on kind of slow ground at this point with Punchestown not all that long away, I'm not so sure. And Team Mullins do have a number of other horses for this. Appreciate it would look the obvious horse that would be suited by it. And will almost certainly be ridden more forward than he was at Cheltenham. So Gerhard would be a possibility of going right-handed, maybe, I think, for him. He's disappointed on his 2 seasons post-Cheltenham runs at kind of right-handed tracks. Mighty Potter, another kind of possible recovery mission for him. Allegory Devasi's in there too, although she also was entering a mare's chase kind of earlier on the card. But yeah, I'm expecting quite a big field for this, and I don't really have a strong view on it at the moment. Plenty of horses with a little bit to prove. Journey With Me, probably the one that doesn't, but he has other kind of things that I don't really like about his chance.
Okay, all fair. Barry, would you have a strong view in that race in terms of, do you have any lean into what might show up? I mean, are you expecting El Fabiolo, one of your favourites, to be there?
Well, obviously he is the one if he does turn up, but there is a good chance he won't, so we'll have to wait and see, and I'm sure Willie won't have decided that until about 1 minute to 10 on declaration morning anyway, so wait and see for everyone. But of the others, you'd have to say that Mighty Potter was very disappointing for me at Cheltenham. He was in a good enough position and was there if he was good enough, but didn't find under pressure. Appreciated, I would have thought, was maybe ridden with a bit too much patience, and I think would benefit from being ridden a little bit more forward. So for me, he would be the one. I think Banbridge is more likely to go to Aintree for better ground. Sir Gerhard never showed up at all at Cheltenham, so I'd throw away my ticket at this stage with him. So now for me, if El Fabiola doesn't turn up, Appreciate is the one I'd like to be on.
Okay, yeah, appreciate it. I mean, you made a good case for him ahead of Cheltenham. We're sticking with him a little bit then. There's obviously a couple of decent Grade 2 novice hurdle races over the 2 miles and the 2 miles, 4.5 furlongs. The likes of High Definition has 2 entries. Dr. Bravo's in there, American Mike amongst the entries. Is there anyone in particular you're very much looking forward to seeing in a specific race, Tony?
Well, I think it's interesting to see Kerry Lee has her horse entered, Nemean Lion. He kind of went to Sandown, ran well there, and then Kelso, I think she has a very good record in Grade 1s, maybe not necessarily winning them, but the horse is running well at a price, so he'd be interesting if he took up his opportunity. But the one I would be interested in the shorter, the 2 mile race, is Found to 50. Keen on him when he ran second to Corbett's Cross. I think Corbett's Cross shaped like the best horse in the Albert Bartlett for a long way. Found to 50's ready course and distance winner at Fairyhouse. Forward going run style is never a negative. I think at Fairyhouse, I think it's attracted often suits front runner, so I could see him figuring prominently in the 2 mile race. But as you said, there's a number of entries there are doubled up. Very hard to know what's going to pitch up.
Yes, it is indeed. You love that Corbett's Cross form. We can move on to, what about the juveniles, Barry? We'll go to you for that, because again, the likes of Blood Destiny, who let you down at Cheltenham, is entered. Gust of Wind is in there. Jazzy Matty as well in the juvenile race. Are you abandoning Blood Destiny now after his run at Cheltenham?
I don't know, I think you'd have to do a resurrection to get back into the picture here. It was reported he ran keen, was the excuse given, but being honest, I didn't think he ran that keen to run as poorly as he did. So no, you'd have to think Gust of Wind on that form, 10 lengths behind Lossiemouth. That is the strongest form. I think Jazzy Matty is a horse who can improve again. He was a good winner of the Fred Winter, was slow at the last, was green enough through the race, but travelled really well into it and into the turn-in and down to the last, but just a little bit slow at the last, but yet found for pressure and got back up to win. So I think that's a good performance and one that he can build on, but no, you'd have to go with Gus to win on the book.
Okay, and Barry, what about other sort of bits and pieces from elsewhere? Obviously, a few people noticed that Monkfish has an entry back over hurdles, a long-awaited reappearance off a injury break for him. Obviously, when we last saw him, he was sort of labelled as the second coming in the chasing division, staying chasing division. What are we expecting from him on reappearance if he was to show up here?
Well, obviously, you'd love to see a flash of him showing something. To say he'd win it might be a big ask, but just good to see him with an entry. Obviously, he's been in training then all season, or most of the season. So like, he is 9-year-old. It's 700 odd days since he ran last, but as you say, he was the second coming, or he was teed up as that. So a very, very classy horse. And just great to see him back in the frame, or back, in the picture of running. There's a few winners. Asterion Fairlange is there. He was second to Somerville Boy in a hurdle in Thurles last time, so he has the benefit of a prep. That was his first one back after a year, so he is a good horse. He's going to take beating, if you like, because he has the run under his belt. But just good to see Monkfish with an entry. It'd be nice to see a little flash of his former brilliance, but I wouldn't be expecting him just to win it.
Tony, with a horse like Monkfish, do they ever really come back at this age to the level that we were hoping they were when pre the injury? Do you think they ever really come back to that sort of level?
The very odd time to do. The very odd time. I think betting on them to come back now is probably for the brave or the sentimental, but the very odd time. I think trainers that do get them back deserve a lot of credit. But yeah, Monkfish, it looks like a race. The fact they're starting them out of a hurdles, or considering starting them out of a hurdles, that they're building up to bringing them back over fences. It makes sense. When horses are coming back from these kind of long races, I would much prefer that if I was considering betting at them. They nearly don't run too well first time back. I think that can take an awful lot out of horses when they've been off maybe for a season and a half, 2 seasons, maybe even longer. So yeah, the gradual build up, to my mind anyway, tends to work well.
And finally, Barry, we shall go to you for the Boylesports novice handicap chase, and we've got Dino Blue in there, which was an interesting entry. Giving the final word on this card to you, that was just the race you wanted to flag up, and obviously keeping the sponsors sweet as well, so we like that sort of behaviour.
Yeah, no, she ran a brilliant race in the Grand Annual behind Mascada. Probably gave away our chance at the last 2 fences, making very sloppy mistakes, but did well to survive, especially the first one at the second last. But a reproduction of that form should be very, very hard to beat here in a handicap as well. So.
Okay, very hard to beat for Dino Blue, then that is her tag. That wraps up the Fairyhouse preview show, but before we go, we did just want to touch on a news story since we were last on Off the Fence. And Tony, it's over to you, because we learnt the news of Bryan Cooper's retirement just after Cheltenham. Some people were quite surprised by this, other people who kind of know him or have an ear to the ground maybe a little bit less surprised. But what was your view when you first heard about Bryan hanging up his boots and stepping away from his career, which has been excellent in the saddle?
Yes, it has been excellent. I don't have the number to hand, but there was a huge figure of Grade 1 winners that he had ridden. Mentioned in the articles post his kind of retirement. I was surprised how many it was. It was quite a high number. Yeah, perhaps this wasn't a surprise within the sport, but maybe to me, who's more maybe outside it, it was a surprise on kind of the bare facts of things. Like he is in what would be most jockeys' prime age-wise. Yeah, he'd maybe jumped about from job to job a little bit lately, but even so, it would be unusual for people to retire at this kind of point. I suppose the piece that really caught my eye was in the Irish Times with Malachi Clark, and where he was really very, very open about his feelings and kind of what the last few years had been like for him. I think the one that initially caught my eye was Adrian McGoldrick, who would have been the medical officer for much of his career, chief medical officer for much of his career, saying that the injury, the leg break that he had falling off Clark was the worst fracture that he'd ever seen in a lower limb. And then Bryan Cooper, this was again really, the imagery of this was tough reading. he was talking about when he was in the hospital in Cheltenham after this, and I think did he have to go for a second surgery, and there was a fella beside him went down for a surgery and he had to have his leg amputated, and they were kind of saying to him, like, you know, it could be, you could be the same type of thing, or at least that's what he was thinking, like, Jesus, that was kind of that was difficult stuff to read now, and you know, very, very tough mentally kind of on anyone. And then after that he goes on to kind of talk, what he's saying, he was kind of at rock bottom and no trainer, you know, wanted to use me. He felt they were thinking, oh, his bottle's gone, that lad's finished. And he himself said then his kind of bottle, you know, maybe wasn't great at the time. And I do think the whole sort of, again, outsider looking in here, Barry is infinitely better placed to talk about this, but the use of these kind of euphemisms, the jockeys kind of use, and very much they may well have to use them, phrases like getting broke up and bottle, like in plain English, like that means like the potential of getting seriously injured, maybe even killed, and like bottle is like your whole mentality, your mental health, whatever. So my interpretation just of reading it, I remember reading a book by a psychologist fellow one time now, who's a very plain speaking psychologist. He used this very direct term, and he kind of talked about people who were, you know, getting on well in life and their mental health was pretty good and all that type of stuff. And he said that they just believe their own bullshit. You know, they believe the stories they're telling themselves, and that everything is going well, maybe even if things aren't going well. But to me, Bryan Cooper just kind of stopped believing his own bullshit. And like, who could blame him with stuff like that going on, maybe in the hospital bed next to him, and maybe people he felt thinking that about him. And I'd say sort of fair play to the chap for kind of breaking maybe a bit of a taboo about that. Like, personally, I've always found the whole thing about jockeys, like, I would have massive admiration for them, and I also think they're totally mad at the one time. Like, it's the juxtaposition of the two things. Like, you've all this stuff that I suppose that, what do we call it, the physical precariousness of the job. Like obviously the most obvious cliche you just mentioned is about 2 ambulances following them round. But there's also this, and I think that maybe isn't mentioned that often, like you're in 1 minute and you're kind of out the next. You're very kind of fungible or replaceable or stuff like that, and that's very tough for a person to deal with, for any person, but especially someone there like maybe Bryan Cooper, who was at the very top very young, and then took a dip kind of post injury and stuff like that. But still in all, an excellent career in a short space of time, amazing number of big race wins, and I wish the fella all the best.
And being told by my producer it's 36 Grade 1 wins, which if you'd asked me to guess, when the day he retired, if you'd asked me to guess how many Grade 1 winners Bryan Cooper had, it'd have been half that, which I know sounds mad, but you forget about that early success he had so many years ago, Barry. And just reflecting on what Tony said there in regards to jockeys' mental toughness, obviously physical toughness is needed, but how much is the mind as big a part of the game as the physical side of things?
Oh, it is. It's probably the biggest part. But Bryan was a very, very talented rider, and he showed it over the years, especially on the big stage. So, you know, you can never take that away from him. And I think, as Tony mentioned, his honesty in how he's approached this, you know, has to be really admired. So he's been brilliant about it. He spoke brilliantly and been so honest. But it is, mental toughness is you're tested a lot of the time, be it by fractures or be it by being let down and being jocked off horse or whatnot. It's how you learn to cope with those situations is really what gets you through. And just it's block it out if you like, whatever way you deal with it. You know, when you get broke up and you're facing that moment, now thankfully I never faced anything like Bryan did that day in Cheltenham, when there was talk of him losing his leg, and if his leg wasn't dealt with in the moment at Cheltenham to straighten it, manipulate it and get the blood flow back going, he possibly could have lost it a lot sooner. So it was a very, very scary time for him, and would have been there would have been a lot to deal with, and maybe it caught up with him in the end. But he had a couple of hard years in recent times. He did keep battling, he did his best, but obviously it wasn't sitting comfortably with him on the lead up to Cheltenham, and he made the right decision for that reason, because if you're in two minds, you're more likely to make the wrong decision. If you're half committed, you're more likely to come off worse with a heavy fall. So I think Bryan has done the right thing, but as I say, great honesty in how he did it.
Absolutely. And look, we wish Bryan Cooper the very best of luck in whatever he chooses to do going forward. I'm sure he will be a success at it. That about wraps up our Boylesports Irish Grand National and Fairyhouse preview show. We will be back next week with, of course, the Aintree Grand National preview show. Loads to get stuck into there. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching and listening. That was Off the Fence.